The questions hung heavy in the ancient air, gnawing at them. If God is truly all good, all powerful, then why this? Why does creation feel so flawed, so brutal, so messy? Hey guys, tonight we're diving headfirst into a story that's been whispered about for centuries, often in hushed tones, sometimes with a conspiratorial wink. Imagine sitting around a flickering fire in ancient Alexandria, the scent of spices and mystery thick in the air, as someone leans in to tell you about Jesus, but not the Sunday school version. This isn't your grandma's Bible story. No, tonight we're unearthing a narrative so profoundly different, so deliciously subversive, that by the time we're done, you might just wonder if everything you thought you knew about the foundations of Western spirituality needs a serious rethink. And trust me, you probably won't survive this journey with your theological innocence intact. So, before you sink too deep into your pillows, let's make a little pact. If tonight's journey genuinely whispers to your soul, then give that like button a gentle tap and consider joining our quiet community by subscribing. Now, let the world outside fade, dim those distracting lights, and surrender to the unfolding mystery we'll explore together. You're drifting back, way back, to the early days, those wild, untamed centuries immediately following what we now call the Common Era. Rome is flexing its imperial muscles, its legions tramping across the known world. But in the shadows, something else is stirring. A myriad of spiritual currents, swirling and colliding, trying to make sense of the universe, of suffering, of divinity. This period, often romanticized as the birth of pure monolithic Christianity, was, in fact, a chaotic, vibrant marketplace of ideas. Think of it like the early internet, but instead of cat videos and conspiracy theories, people were sharing revelations and philosophical treatises on papyrus scrolls. It was a proper spiritual free-for-all, honestly, a real theological Wild West. One mainstream historical fact that often gets glossed over is just how incredibly diverse early Christian thought truly was. We tend to imagine a straight line from Jesus to the Nicene Creed, but in reality, there were countless interpretations of who Jesus was, what he taught, and what salvation actually meant. You had groups like the Ebionites, who insisted Jesus was merely a human prophet, and then others who saw him as purely divine, a phantom walking among us. It was less a single unified church and more a loose confederation of squabbling spiritual clubs, all claiming the true path. It's almost like trying to pick a favorite streaming service back then. Everyone had their own exclusive content, and you were constantly trying to figure out which one was worth your precious denarii. Among these swirling currents emerged a particularly intriguing and, to some, profoundly unsettling perspective: Gnosticism. Now, the name itself comes from the Greek word gnosis, which simply means knowledge. But not just any knowledge. We're talking about a secret, intuitive, experiential knowledge, often revealed through mystical insight rather than through dogma or scripture. This was a knowledge that promised to liberate you, to awaken you to a hidden reality. It was like finally getting the cheat codes to the universe, realizing there's a whole secret level you never knew existed. A quirky tidbit about Gnosticism is that they sometimes claimed their insights came directly from Jesus after his resurrection, in private, exclusive teachings given only to certain disciples. Imagine Jesus giving masterclasses on cosmic secrets, but only to a select few. It's enough to make you feel a little left out, isn't it? So, while the emerging Orthodox Church was building its hierarchical structure, gathering its sacred texts, and formulating its creeds, the Gnostics were busy exploring the inner landscape, seeking direct communion with the divine. They weren't so much interested in historical accuracy or ritualistic adherence as they were in a profound personal awakening. Historians still argue whether Gnosticism was a separate religion that simply adopted Christian elements, or if it was a genuine, albeit heterodox form of early Christianity. It's a bit like debating whether a cover band is truly the original or just a really good tribute act. Either way, they were certainly playing a different tune. As you settle deeper into the story, you start to feel the cool, damp air of an underground chamber, perhaps a secret meeting place where these ideas were exchanged. You hear the hushed voices, the scratching of quills on parchment, the intellectual ferment of minds grappling with the most profound questions of existence. The Gnostics were asking, if God is good, why is there so much suffering in the world? Why does creation feel so flawed, so brutal, so messy? Their answers, as we'll soon discover, were utterly radical and completely upended the prevailing narratives of their time, and perhaps even ours. They looked at the world and they didn't see perfection. They saw a beautiful, intricate cage. If God is truly all good, all powerful, then why? You're now fully immersed in this cosmic drama, witnessing the unfortunate genesis of our reality. Sophia, the Aeon of Wisdom, in her overzealous independent streak, has brought forth something truly unprecedented and, frankly, a bit of a cosmic mistake. This wasn't some intentional divine plan, but more like an accidental ripple in the pristine pond of the Pleroma, the divine fullness. Imagine a perfectly still, crystal-clear lake, and suddenly a single errant drop falls into it, creating an imperfect, murky splash outside its tranquil boundaries. That splash in Gnostic cosmology is where our story truly begins. This imperfect offspring, born from Sophia's misstep, is the Demiurge. And here's where the narrative gets truly provocative. The Gnostics often identified this Demiurge with the God of the Old Testament. Yes, the creator God, Yahweh, the one who thunders from Sinai and demands obedience, was, to the Gnostics, not the ultimate supreme deity, but a lesser, arrogant, and ultimately ignorant being. This Demiurge was powerful, certainly, but lacked true gnosis, true knowledge of the higher Pleroma from which he indirectly originated. He believed himself to be the only God, the ultimate creator, looking around at his somewhat clunky material creation and declaring, "I am God, and there is no other." A quirky tidbit about this is that some Gnostic texts describe the Demiurge as having the head of a lion and the body of a serpent, a rather vivid and monstrous image to convey his perceived brutish nature and limited understanding. Not exactly the benevolent shepherd of traditional scripture, is it? A mainstream historical fact often overlooked is that the early Christian landscape contained significant philosophical debates about the nature of evil and divine omnipotence. How could an all-good, all-powerful God create a world with so much suffering? The Gnostic answer, placing the blame on an ignorant Demiurge rather than the supreme God, offered a compelling and, for some, deeply comforting theological solution to the problem of evil. It wasn't God's fault, it was the Demiurge's. It's like blaming the intern for the coffee machine breaking down, not the CEO. So, the Demiurge, blinded by his own self-importance and ignorance, set about creating the material world we inhabit. He fashioned the cosmos, the planets, the stars, and ultimately humanity, out of primal matter. But because he himself was imperfect, and because his creation was birthed outside the pure light of the Pleroma, this world was inherently flawed, a shadowy reflection of the true spiritual realm. It's a bit like someone trying to copy a masterpiece without ever having seen the original, working only from a blurry second-hand description. The result is inevitably going to be derivative, to say the least.
Historians still argue whether the Gnostic critique of the Demiurge was primarily an internal Christian debate, a Jewish-Christian sectarian dispute, or an influence from older Persian dualistic traditions like Zoroastrianism, which posited a struggle between forces of light and darkness. The intellectual tapestry of the ancient world was incredibly rich and interconnected, and ideas flowed freely, sometimes merging in unexpected ways. You can almost feel the air in that hidden chamber growing heavier as this profound revelation sinks in. The very ground beneath your feet, the tangible objects around you, your own physical body, all are products of this lesser creator, a kind of divine booby prize. This isn't just about theology, it's about shifting your entire perception of reality. It means that the rules of this world, the perceived limitations, the suffering, are not necessarily divinely ordained by the highest good, but are part of a cosmic mistake, a misconstruction by a bewildered, powerful, but ultimately limited entity. It's like realizing you've been playing a video game on the wrong settings all along, with arbitrary rules imposed by a glitchy developer. This idea that our world is fundamentally flawed, a prison or a snare, is central to the Gnostic perspective. The Demiurge, in his arrogance, sought to entrap the divine sparks that had, perhaps accidentally, fallen into his creation. He wanted to maintain his dominion, to be worshipped as the sole God. And for the Gnostics, humanity's challenge was to see through this illusion, to recognize the prison for what it was, and to seek escape. It paints a rather dramatic picture, doesn't it? Of us trapped here, longing for a home we dimly remember but can barely conceive.
What if everything you've been told about your origins was a carefully constructed lie? What if the very essence of your being held a secret so profound it could shatter the known universe? As you mentally navigate this strange, flawed cosmos, a creation not of divine perfection, but of ignorant power, you start to feel a subtle unease. This Demiurge, the self-proclaimed ruler of this material realm, isn't just a cosmic blunderer. He's actively trying to keep you from realizing your true heritage. He's like that slightly dim but incredibly stubborn IT guy who set up your computer network, convinced he's a genius, and now won't let you access anything beyond the most basic functions because he genuinely believes that's all there is. He doesn't know about the cloud, about external servers, about the vast, infinite internet beyond his limited creation. The critical piece of the Gnostic story, and what makes it so profoundly different, is the belief that you possess a piece of the divine. Remember Sophia's cosmic blunder, that accidental splash of divine light? Well, some of that light, those precious sparks from the Pleroma, fell into the Demiurge's clumsy creation. And that is what you are. You are not merely a creation of the Demiurge, a lump of clay animated by his breath. You are, at your core, a fragment of the true supreme God, a divine spark trapped within a material body, a prison fashioned by the ignorant creator. It's like finding a genuine diamond embedded in a lump of concrete, completely unaware of its true value. A mainstream historical fact is that the concept of the soul in ancient thought was incredibly varied, from the Greek psyche to the Hebrew nephesh. However, the Gnostic idea of an inherent divine spark, a direct emanation of the ultimate God residing within every human, was a distinct and radical departure from many contemporary views that saw humanity as entirely separate from or subservient to the divine. This wasn't just a soul, it was a fragment of God itself. This divine spark within you longs for its true home, the Pleroma, the realm of pure light. But it's weighed down by the material body and by the ignorance that the Demiurge tries to instill.
He wants you to believe that He is the only God, that this world is the only reality, that His laws are the only laws. He doesn't want you to wake up to your true nature, because if you do, you might just find your way back to where you truly belong, leaving His flimsy dominion. It's a bit like a jailer who not only locks you in, but also convinces you that the cell is the entire universe and there's nothing beyond its walls. Quite the gaslight, isn't it?
A quirky tidbit is that some Gnostic texts describe the Demiurge attempting to specifically prevent humanity from gaining true knowledge, echoing the story of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. In this Gnostic retelling, the serpent in Eden wasn't a tempter from an evil force, but rather a benevolent messenger, a symbol of wisdom, trying to help Adam and Eve gain the knowledge, gnosis, that would free them from the Demiurge's ignorance. Talk about flipping the script on a classic. Suddenly, that apple looks a lot more appealing, and the serpent becomes a rather misunderstood hero. Historians still argue whether the Gnostic interpretation of the Eden story was a direct polemic against Jewish scripture or a broader allegorical device to explain humanity's predicament. Was it a theological attack or a narrative tool to convey deep spiritual truths about awakening? Regardless, it reveals a profound reevaluation of classic religious narratives, turning villains into heroes and divine pronouncements into instruments of control. So, you are sitting there, perhaps in a quiet room or lying in your bed, and this ancient whisper reaches you across the millennia. You are more than you seem. You are not just flesh and bone, not just a fleeting existence in a flawed world. You carry within you a piece of eternity, a fragment of the divine light that longs to return home. The goal, then, is not blind obedience, not appeasing an external deity, but rather awakening this inner spark, liberating it from the shackles of ignorance and materialism. This liberation, this awakening, is achieved through gnosis, not intellectual knowledge, but a deep, intuitive spiritual understanding of your true self and the true nature of reality. It's a knowing that transcends words, a realization that hits you like a lightning bolt, shifting your entire perspective. And once you begin to truly know yourself, to recognize the divine within, the world of the Demiurge starts to lose its grip. The illusions begin to crumble, and the path back to the Pleroma, your true spiritual home, begins to reveal itself. If Jesus was the ultimate awakener, what forgotten texts held his deepest secrets? What whispered truths did he impart that the world was never meant to hear? As you glimpse the alternative scriptures, the very texts that dared to challenge the prevailing narrative, you're now poised to understand the core philosophical divergence of Gnosticism, its radical emphasis on knowledge over blind faith. This wasn't just a theological preference, it was a completely different operating system for the spiritual life, a paradigm shift that sought to empower the individual rather than bind them to external authority. Imagine a world where instead of being told what to believe, you were encouraged, even compelled, to discover truth for yourself. That's the Gnostic invitation. A mainstream historical fact is that the concept of faith in early Christianity often involved both belief, pistis, and trust. However, the emerging Orthodox Church increasingly emphasized belief in specific doctrines and adherence to communal rituals as the primary path to salvation. For them, faith was often a prerequisite, a necessary surrender to accepted truths. Gnosticism, by contrast, wasn't against faith entirely, but it considered it a starting point, a mere kindergarten step on the journey toward a much deeper, more transformative experience, gnosis. It's like being told to accept that gravity exists versus actually understanding the physics behind it. One requires assent, the other profound insight.
For the Gnostics, salvation wasn't something earned through good deeds or adherence to a strict moral code, nor was it a gift bestowed simply by believing in Jesus' sacrifice. No, salvation was about awakening, about a radical inner transformation brought about by knowing your true divine nature and the true nature of the cosmos. This gnosis wasn't intellectual knowledge in the academic sense, like knowing historical dates or scientific formulas. It was an intuitive, experiential, and often mystical realization, a sudden flash of insight that revealed the hidden realities of existence, liberating your inner divine spark from the material prison. It's like solving a complex riddle, not by calculating, but by suddenly seeing the elegant solution. A quirky tidbit that illustrates this is the Gnostic idea that some individuals were pneumatics, spiritual ones, possessing a greater capacity for gnosis, while others were psychics, soulish ones, or hylics, material ones, less capable of deep spiritual understanding. This created a kind of spiritual hierarchy, not based on social status or ritual purity, but on one's inherent spiritual capacity and receptivity to gnosis. It's a bit like different levels of access to the cosmic Wi-Fi. Some just had better reception for divine truth. Historians still argue whether this Gnostic distinction between different human types led to elitism and exclusivity within Gnostic communities, or if it was simply a recognition of varying levels of spiritual readiness. Was it a snobby dismissal of the unenlightened masses, or a pragmatic acknowledgement that not everyone is ready for the deepest truths at the same time? The debate highlights the tension between universal salvation and personalized spiritual paths. This emphasis on personal revelation meant that the authority lay not with external institutions, priests, or even written scriptures, though they certainly had their own. Instead, the ultimate authority resided within the individual, in their capacity to receive and understand the divine gnosis. This was a profoundly democratic, even anarchic spiritual vision from the perspective of the emerging Orthodox Church. If everyone could access God directly through inner knowledge, what need was there for a mediating clergy, sacraments, or a centralized authority telling you what to believe? It utterly undermined the entire structure they were trying to build. It's like telling everyone they can build their own custom software when the company wants to sell them a pre-packaged off-the-shelf solution. You can almost feel the chill wind of rebellion sweeping through the ancient world with this idea. It was a rejection of the believe as you are told mentality, replacing it with a seek and ye shall find imperative that went far beyond simply finding a specific church. It was about finding the divine within. This search for inner knowledge, for that personal transformative revelation, was the very heart of the Gnostic quest. It was a journey not across lands, but into the deepest recesses of your own being, seeking the spark of light that promised ultimate freedom.
In a world veiled by illusion, who could pierce the deception? Who held the key to liberating the divine spark within? With Jesus redefined as the ultimate revealer of gnosis, the very texts that record his teachings take on an entirely different weight and meaning for the Gnostics. You see, while the burgeoning Orthodox Church was painstakingly assembling its canon, the familiar Gospels of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, the Gnostics were cherishing and circulating a whole library of other texts, equally vibrant and, to them, even more profound. These are the Gnostic Gospels, the alternative narratives that, for centuries, were lost to history, hidden away, or deliberately suppressed. Finding them was like unearthing a secret hard drive full of forbidden files, promising a complete rewrite of historical memory. A mainstream historical fact is that the selection of which books would become part of the Christian New Testament canon was a long, complex, and often contentious process, taking centuries to finalize. It wasn't a sudden unanimous decision, but rather a series of councils, debates, and theological skirmishes where different communities championed different texts.
The Gnostic Gospels were simply on the losing side of this very intense, very political literary battle. It's a bit like a hotly contested election for the definitive bestseller list, and these guys just didn't get enough votes. Among the most famous of these rediscovered texts is the Gospel of Thomas. Imagine a collection of 114 sayings attributed to Jesus, often presented without a narrative framework. No birth story, no crucifixion, no resurrection drama in the traditional sense. Just pure, unadulterated wisdom, like cryptic tweets from a divine source. Many of these sayings echo familiar biblical verses, but others are utterly unique and deeply Gnostic in their implication. For instance, Jesus declares, "If you bring forth what is within you, what you have will save you. If you do not have that within you, what you do not have within you will kill you." This isn't about external salvation, it's about unlocking your inner divine potential. A quirky tidbit is that the Gospel of Thomas begins with the provocative line, "These are the secret sayings that the living Jesus spoke and Didymus Judas Thomas recorded." Right out of the gate, it tells you this isn't for just anyone, it's the VIP lounge of wisdom. Then there's the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, a text that utterly redefines her role, elevating her far beyond a repentant sinner to a key disciple, privy to Jesus' most profound revelations. In this gospel, Mary is portrayed as having received special esoteric knowledge directly from Jesus, knowledge that even the male apostles struggle to understand or accept. Peter, in particular, often expresses jealousy and doubt about Mary's authority and insights. Did he really speak privately with a woman and not openly to us? He grumbles in one passage. This portrayal challenges centuries of traditional ecclesiastical hierarchy and suggests a very different power dynamic within Jesus' inner circle. It's like discovering that the actual genius behind a major tech company was the quiet person in the corner, not the loud CEO. Historians still argue whether these secret teachings were genuine oral traditions passed down from Jesus, or if they were later theological developments by Gnostics who sought to legitimize their unique understanding of Christianity. Were they eyewitness accounts or insightful interpretations born from deeply spiritual contemplation? The debate continues, adding layers to the mystery. These Gnostic Gospels, along with others, like the Gospel of Philip, which contains tantalizing hints about Jesus and Mary Magdalene's close relationship, even suggesting they often kissed, a detail that caused quite a stir in modern times, obviously, and the Apocryphon of John, a grand cosmological treatise explaining the Demiurge and the Pleroma in detail, paint a picture of a Christianity far more fluid, philosophical, and mystical than the one that ultimately dominated. You begin to understand why these texts were deemed so dangerous by the rising Orthodox Church. They undermined the authority of the priesthood, the need for ritual, and the exclusivity of a single defined path to God. If salvation came from inner knowledge, revealed directly to Jesus to individuals, then what need was there for an intermediary institution? It was an existential threat to their nascent power structure, a spiritual wildcard that simply couldn't be allowed to circulate freely. So they were hidden, buried, and eventually many were thought lost forever, until their stunning rediscovery in places like Nag Hammadi in the mid-20th century, bringing these silenced voices roaring back to life.
You've unsealed the secret texts, explored the alternative gospels, but what about the figure at the heart of it all? The very one whose existence sparked this cosmic unraveling. As you reconsider the central figures of the Christian narrative through a Gnostic lens, you arrive at the very heart of the story for many, the crucifixion. You've been conditioned to see the cross as the ultimate symbol of sacrifice, atonement, and redemption for sin.
But for the Gnostics, who viewed sin less as a moral failing and more as a state of ignorance, and the material world as a flawed construct, the interpretation of Jesus' suffering and death takes on profoundly different, often symbolic meanings. For them, the cross was often a metaphor, not just a physical event. It's like discovering that the dramatic climax of a play you thought was literal was actually meant to be a symbolic representation of an internal struggle. A mainstream historical fact is that the Roman Empire regularly employed crucifixion as a brutal form of public execution designed to inflict maximum suffering and humiliation. The historical evidence for Jesus' crucifixion is widely accepted by most historians. The Gnostics, however, weren't primarily concerned with the historical grittiness of the event, but rather its spiritual significance, and they interpreted that significance in radically different ways. One prominent Gnostic view, called Doceticism, from the Greek dokein, meaning to seem or to appear, argued that Jesus, being a divine aeon from the perfect Pleroma, could not possibly have genuinely suffered or died on a physical cross. How could a pure spirit from the true God become so entangled in the messy, imperfect matter of the Demiurge's world as to experience pain and death? For Docetists, Jesus' body was not truly flesh and blood, but a phantom or an illusion, merely appearing to suffer and die. The suffering was an act, a necessary part of his mission to deliver gnosis, but not a literal physical reality for the divine Christ. A quirky tidbit is that some Gnostic texts even suggest that it was Simon of Cyrene or another figure who was crucified in Jesus' place, while Jesus himself stood by, perhaps laughing, having successfully tricked the Demiurge and his earthly agents. Imagine the ultimate divine prank, where the divine stand-in takes the fall. Historians still argue whether Doceticism was a primitive Christian belief that predated later Orthodox Christologies, or if it was a later philosophical development influenced by Greek ideas that held matter as inherently inferior to spirit. Was it an early, simpler understanding, or a complex theological workaround to reconcile divinity with worldly suffering? The debate highlights the vast spectrum of early Christian thought on Jesus' nature. So, if the physical suffering wasn't real for the divine Christ, what was the significance of the cross? For many Gnostics, the cross became a powerful metaphor for the suffering of the divine spark within humanity, trapped and crucified within the material world. It represented the human condition of being bound by ignorance, by the limitations of the body, and by the rules of the Demiurge. Jesus, by seemingly undergoing the crucifixion, was demonstrating the path to liberation from this spiritual imprisonment. His death was a symbol of the death of ignorance, or the death of the ego that kept the divine spark enslaved. You can almost feel the intellectual leap here. This isn't about vicarious atonement. It's about a symbolic reenactment of humanity's existential dilemma. The resurrection, then, isn't just a physical raising from the dead, but the awakening of that divine spark, the triumph of gnosis over the dark forces of ignorance and materialism. The vertical beam of the cross might represent the connection to the higher Pleroma, while the horizontal beam represents the entanglement in the material world. The ultimate goal was to transcend the horizontal, to align fully with the vertical. This Gnostic understanding fundamentally alters the meaning of Jesus' passion. It shifts the focus from external sacrifice to internal transformation. You are not saved by the cross, but you are awakened through its symbolic meaning, realizing that your own divine essence is held captive and yearns for liberation. It offered a deeply personal and experiential path, bypassing the need for a bloody sacrifice to appeal a seemingly vengeful God. From the symbolic crucifixion to the spiritual resurrection, the narrative twists, revealing profound truths hidden in plain sight.
But if Jesus didn't physically rise, what did his return signify for those who sought deeper wisdom? Having explored the Gnostic reinterpretation of the crucifixion as a profound metaphor for spiritual imprisonment, you naturally turn your gaze to what comes next, the resurrection. And just as with the cross, the Gnostic understanding of Jesus' resurrection departs dramatically from the conventional narrative, emphasizing an awakening to higher consciousness rather than a literal physical return of the body. For them, it wasn't about a reanimated corpse, but about a radical transformation of perception, a spiritual transcendence that offered a pathway to true liberation. It's less like a zombie movie and more like a profound spiritual epiphany, where the main character suddenly sees everything. A mainstream historical fact is that the bodily resurrection of Jesus is a cornerstone of Orthodox Christian faith. The empty tomb, the physical appearances to disciples, and the belief in a resurrected body that ascends to heaven are central tenets, providing assurance of eternal life and the victory over death. This emphasis on the physical body was crucial for establishing the continuity between Jesus' life, death, and triumphant return, grounding the spiritual in a tangible historical event. For the Gnostics, however, the idea of a divine being from the pure Pleroma returning to a flawed material body, even a perfected one, seemed counterintuitive. Why would pure spirit want to re-entangle itself with the very matter it sought to transcend? Instead, many Gnostics interpreted the resurrection as a spiritual event, a symbolic representation of the triumph of gnosis over the limitations of the material world and the ignorance imposed by the Demiurge. Jesus' resurrection wasn't a physical act for himself, but an exemplum for humanity, a demonstration of the potential for the divine spark within us to awaken and transcend the bodily prison. A quirky tidbit that illustrates this is how some Gnostic texts describe post-resurrection appearances of Jesus. They're often less about eating fish or showing wounds, and more about deep philosophical dialogues, where Jesus reveals profound cosmic secrets and spiritual truths to his disciples. In the Gospel of Mary, for instance, Mary Magdalene describes a vision of the resurrected Jesus giving her hidden teachings, focusing on the mind's ascent through various spiritual planes rather than on any physical transformation. It's like the ultimate seminar on advanced metaphysics, given by the ultimate guru. No wonder Peter was so jealous. He missed out on the really juicy stuff. Historians still argue whether the Gnostic emphasis on a spiritual resurrection was a direct challenge to the Orthodox belief in bodily resurrection, or if it reflected an older, more Hellenistic understanding of the immortal soul transcending the mortal body. Was it a theological innovation or a continuation of ancient philosophical ideas applied to Jesus? The debate touches on the interplay of Jewish and Greek thought in early Christianity. So, when the Gnostics spoke of resurrection, they were often speaking of the awakening of consciousness, the rising of the divine spark from the slumber of ignorance and materiality. It was a call to profound self-discovery and enlightenment. To resurrect was to shed the illusions of the Demiurge's world, to recognize your true spiritual self, and to remember your connection to the ultimate, true God. This wasn't a one-time event that happened to Jesus alone. It was a potential experience for every individual who achieved gnosis. Your own resurrection was possible, right here, right now, through inner knowledge. You can almost feel the weight lift, the sense of liberation this idea offered. No longer were you waiting for a distant, future bodily resurrection dependent on an external miracle. Instead, the power of resurrection, of spiritual awakening, lay within your grasp, a journey of inner transformation that could begin at any moment. It transforms the concept from a singular historical event into a personal, ongoing spiritual process, where you are not just a spectator, but an active participant in your own divine awakening.
Despite the ancient whispers of spiritual liberation and awakening, history shows us that truth can be a dangerous thing. How did the rising tide of orthodoxy crush these alternative understandings, silencing voices for nearly 2 millennia? You've now seen how the Gnostic story redefines creation, humanity, Jesus, and even resurrection. It's a truly intoxicating blend of cosmic drama and profound personal awakening. But, as with any narrative that challenges the status quo, this alternative vision of Christianity did not survive without a fight. Indeed, the very nature of Gnostic belief, with its emphasis on individual gnosis and secret teachings, put it on a collision course with the burgeoning, increasingly centralized and dogmatic Orthodox Church. The result was not a friendly debate club, but a determined campaign of persecution of the seekers. It's like watching a huge corporation squash a plucky, innovative startup because it threatened their entire business model. A mainstream historical fact is that by the 2nd and 3rd century CE, the Christian movement was growing rapidly, but was also experiencing significant internal conflicts over doctrine, leadership, and scripture. The need for unity and a coherent identity, especially in the face of Roman persecution, led to a strong push for uniformity. Gnosticism, with its diverse interpretations and lack of central authority, was seen as a major threat to this developing orthodoxy. It was less about nuanced theological disagreement and more about who got to write the definitive history book. The Orthodox Church, in its quest for stability and universal appeal, sought to establish a single, authoritative lineage of bishops, apostolic succession, a fixed set of scriptures, the canon, and a clear, unified creed. Gnosticism, with its myriad sects, its emphasis on secret revelation over public teaching, and its challenge to the Demiurge, often identified with the God of the Old Testament, directly contradicted all of these efforts. If salvation came from personal gnosis, then bishops and priests became less necessary. If Jesus' teachings were secret, then the widely accepted Gospels were incomplete. And if the Old Testament God was a cosmic bungler, then a vast swath of sacred tradition was in question. This was more than heresy, it was spiritual anarchy from the Orthodox perspective. A quirky tidbit that illustrates the Orthodox Church's frustration is found in the writings of early church fathers like Irenaeus of Lyons, who spent considerable effort meticulously cataloging and refuting various Gnostic groups in his monumental work Adversus Heresies. He wasn't just debating, he was essentially writing a detailed how-to guide on what not to believe, often ridiculing Gnostic myths and arguing for the logical absurdity of their claims. He's essentially the ancient world's version of a snarky online reviewer, giving 0 stars to competing spiritual products. Historians still argue whether the suppression of Gnosticism was primarily a theological necessity to preserve the true faith, or if it was a political maneuver by an aspiring religious institution to consolidate power and eliminate rival interpretations. Was it a pure act of doctrinal defense, or a power grab veiled in piety? The answer, as always, is likely a complex blend of both, but the outcome was undeniably clear. The methods of suppression were varied. Gnostic texts were condemned as heretical, often publicly burned, and their adherents excommunicated from mainstream Christian communities. Writing polemics against them became a booming industry for Orthodox theologians. Being labeled a Gnostic meant you were outside the fold, a spiritual outcast, a dangerous deviant. This wasn't just academic, it had real-world consequences, as social ostracization could be severe in tightly knit ancient communities. Imagine being unfriended by everyone in your social circle, but for your soul. You sense the chill in the air, the heavy hand of emerging authorities silencing dissenting voices. The vibrant, diverse spiritual marketplace of the early centuries gradually narrowed, its competing ideas systematically pruned away, until only one dominant branch remained. The Gnostic story, once a powerful alternative, was pushed underground, its texts buried, its followers scattered, effectively erased from the official historical record for nearly 2 millennia. It's a stark reminder of how history is often written by the victors, and how easily inconvenient truths can be swept under the rug of accepted narratives. But as you know, even the most deeply buried secrets have a way of resurfacing.
But even as the Orthodox Church sought to bury these truths, the echoes of Gnostic wisdom persisted, like a forgotten melody humming just beneath the surface of accepted history. Where might we still hear these ancient whispers today, even in the most unexpected places? Despite the relentless efforts of the emerging Orthodox Church to extinguish its flame, the Gnostic fire, though pushed deep underground, never truly died out. Like tenacious seeds carried by the wind, Gnostic ideas found ways to scatter, to adapt, and to subtly influence thought and spirituality across centuries. You might be surprised to discover that the echoes of this ancient quest for inner knowledge, for a direct connection to the divine, resonate powerfully in the modern world. It's like hearing a familiar melody from a forgotten tune, realizing its essence was never truly lost. A mainstream historical fact is that while overt Gnostic movements largely disappeared after the 4th and 5th centuries, certain dualistic or esoteric spiritual traditions, like the Cathars in medieval Europe, were later identified by their persecutors as having Gnostic-like tendencies, due to their rejection of the material world and emphasis on inner purity. This suggests that even without a direct lineage, similar spiritual impulses could arise independently or be subtly influenced by surviving fragments of Gnostic thought. It's almost as if certain spiritual archetypes just keep recurring, no matter how many times you try to banish them. Think about the fascination with secret knowledge, with hidden truths that permeates so much of our contemporary culture, from spiritual books to blockbuster movies. The idea that there's a deeper reality behind the mundane, that you possess untapped potential, or that institutions are hiding something from you, these are all subtle reverberations of Gnostic themes. When you hear phrases like "wake up" or "seek within," you're tapping into a very ancient, very Gnostic impulse. It's like the universe itself keeps nudging you towards a secret level you didn't know was there. A quirky tidbit is how contemporary popular culture, often unwittingly, taps into Gnostic themes. Movies like The Matrix, for example, are almost textbook Gnostic parables. A protagonist, Neo, discovers that the world he thought was real is an illusion, the Demiurge's creation. He has a hidden divine spark within him, the One, and he's awakened to gnosis by a guide, Morpheus or Trinity, who reveals the true nature of reality, allowing him to transcend the system. It's no coincidence that these narratives resonate so deeply. They tap into a primal human yearning to break free from perceived limitations. It's the ultimate red pill, isn't it? Historians still argue whether the apparent resurgence of Gnostic themes in modern spirituality is a direct, conscious revival or merely a coincidental development of similar philosophical concepts arising from a shared human condition. Is it genuine influence or parallel evolution? Regardless, the parallels are striking and undeniable. You see these echoes in various New Age movements that emphasize self-discovery, inner wisdom, and personal transformation as the path to spiritual fulfillment. Many contemporary spiritual teachers and authors, without explicitly identifying as Gnostic, often present ideas remarkably similar to ancient Gnostic concepts. The world as a school or illusion, the importance of individual awakening, the presence of a divine spark or higher self within each person, and the idea that true salvation comes from within rather than from external dogma or authority. Even in more traditional religious contexts, there's a quiet undercurrent of what might be called soft Gnosticism. People increasingly seek a personal, experiential relationship with the divine, often feeling dissatisfied with rigid doctrines or institutional mediation. They yearn for a direct knowing, a personal gnosis that transcends mere belief.
It's a testament to the enduring power of the Gnostic quest, the deeply human desire to understand the universe and our place in it, not just through inherited stories, but through direct, transformative experience. As you reflect on these modern reverberations, you realize that the ancient Gnostic story isn't just a historical curiosity. It's a living testament to an alternative way of understanding spirituality, one that continues to challenge, inspire, and provoke. It invites you to look beyond the surface, to question what you've been told, and to seek the hidden light within yourself, knowing that the journey towards gnosis is as relevant today as it was 2,000 years ago. If the world is a stage of illusions, and the path to freedom lies within, then what is your role in this cosmic drama? How do you reclaim the profound, undeniable light that glows at your very core? You've journeyed through the labyrinthine cosmology of Gnosticism, from the supreme Pleroma to Sophia's cosmic blunder, the ignorant Demiurge, and the divine spark trapped within you. You've seen Jesus redefined as the Awakener, the secret Gospels unveiled, and the core tenet of knowledge over blind faith illuminated. You've even touched upon the quiet resilience of these ideas, echoing into our modern spiritual landscape. Now, as our exploration nears its culmination, we arrive at the most personal and profound invitation of the Gnostic story, the imperative to reclaim your inner light. A mainstream historical fact is that throughout human history, many spiritual traditions, from Eastern mysticism to Western esoteric schools, have emphasized the concept of an inner divine essence or an inherent capacity for spiritual understanding within the individual. While the language and specific cosmologies differ, the shared impulse to look inward for truth is a universal human quest. Gnosticism simply offers one of the most compelling and dramatic narratives for this internal journey. The Gnostic story, at its heart, is a narrative of remembrance. It posits that you are not merely a creation of this flawed material world, bound by its limitations and subject to its often arbitrary rules. No, you are a fragment of the ultimate divine, a piece of the true God temporarily veiled by the illusions of the Demiurge. Your innate state isn't one of sin or inherent brokenness, but of dormant divinity waiting to be rediscovered. It's like having a superpower you've forgotten how to use, and the Gnostic path is simply the manual. A quirky tidbit that beautifully encapsulates this idea is the Gnostic emphasis on the idea of recollection or anamnesis. It wasn't about learning something entirely new, but about remembering what your soul already knew from its primordial existence in the Pleroma. It's like experiencing déjà vu, but for your entire spiritual lineage, a sudden, profound recognition of a truth that was always within you, just obscured by the fog of worldly existence. This isn't brain knowledge, it's soul knowledge. Historians still argue whether the Gnostic concept of anamnesis was directly influenced by Platonic philosophy, which also spoke of the soul recollecting perfect forms it knew before birth, or if it was an independent mystical insight born from direct spiritual experience. Was it philosophical derivation or spiritual revelation? The ongoing debate underscores the rich intellectual cross-pollination of the ancient world. So, how do you reclaim this inner light? Not through external rituals or blind adherence to dogma, but through the pursuit of gnosis, that transformative, intuitive knowledge that awakens the divine spark within. This often involves introspection, meditation, critical questioning of perceived reality, and a readiness to look beyond the literal interpretations of sacred texts and narratives. It's about cultivating an inner eye, a spiritual radar that can discern the true from the false, the divine from the merely worldly. You are invited to look at the world around you not just as a given reality, but as a potential illusion, a matrix constructed by a lesser power. The suffering, the limitations, the endless cycle of desires, these are not necessarily divine decrees from the ultimate God, but symptoms of a cosmic error from which you can awaken. This realization is liberating because it shifts the locus of control from external forces to your own inner being. You are not a helpless pawn, you are a veiled God. This ongoing quest for personal truth, for direct spiritual experience, is the enduring legacy of Gnosticism. It encourages you to challenge assumptions, to seek wisdom in unconventional places, and to trust the stirrings of your own deepest intuition. It's a call to become your own spiritual authority, guided by the light that already resides within you. The Gnostic path is ultimately a journey of self-realization, recognizing that the divine is not just out there somewhere, but intimately, intrinsically woven into the very fabric of your being.
You've traversed the winding paths of ancient Gnostic thought, from the cosmic drama of Sophia and the Demiurge to the awakening power of Jesus and the profound significance of reclaiming your inner divine spark. Now, as the journey through this whispered history comes to its gentle close, you are left with a quiet invitation to ponder this ongoing quest for personal truth and divine connection, not as an academic exercise, but as a living, breathing possibility within your own life. A mainstream historical fact is that throughout human history, various mystical traditions across cultures have independently arrived at similar conclusions regarding the divine immanence within humanity, suggesting a universal human experience of seeking transcendence through inner exploration. Gnosticism offers one distinct and powerful lens through which to view this universal yearning. The Gnostic story, stripped of its ancient controversies and esoteric jargon, ultimately points you back to yourself. It whispers that the grand, ultimate truth is not something to be found solely in external doctrines, in rigid institutions, or in the pages of a single book. Instead, it suggests that the deepest wisdom, the most profound connection to the divine, resides within you, a sacred ember waiting for your attention, waiting for your breath to fan it into a living flame. This isn't just a philosophy, it's an invitation to introspection, a call to spiritual courage. A quirky tidbit that often emerges from deep self-reflection, reminiscent of Gnostic thought, is the realization that many of the problems you face externally are often reflections of internal states of ignorance or disconnection. It's like discovering that the scary monster under your bed was just a pile of clothes casting a terrifying shadow in your own mind. When you shed the illusion, the fear dissipates. The Gnostics believed that by understanding the cosmic illusion, you could dissolve your personal illusions. Historians still argue whether the Gnostic emphasis on individual spiritual experience inherently leads to a dismissal of community and shared ritual, or if it simply prioritizes the personal journey without necessarily negating collective practice. Is it a lonely path, or one that enriches communal life by bringing deeper individual insights? The debate reminds us that even profound spiritual truths can be lived out in various ways. So, as you lie here, dimming the mental lights on this ancient narrative, let the calming whisper of the Gnostic wisdom settle over you. Consider the possibility that the world, with all its beautiful chaos and perplexing suffering, might be less about divine judgment and more about a cosmic unfolding, an intricate tapestry woven by forces we are only beginning to comprehend. And in that unfolding, you are not a passive observer, but an active participant, carrying a piece of the ultimate source within your very being. This journey is not about converting to an ancient religion. It's about embracing a perspective that empowers you to question, to seek, to truly know for yourself. It's about cultivating an inner radar, a sense of discernment that guides you through the noise and confusion of external claims. It encourages you to find your own gnosis, your own liberating knowledge, trusting that the universe has placed a profound and inextinguishable light within you, waiting to be fully seen and lived. Let the whispers of these ancient seekers remind you that the spiritual path is often less about finding answers in books and more about listening to the quiet knowing within your own heart. It's a never-ending journey of discovery, where every question leads to deeper understanding, and every moment of honest introspection brings you closer to your true divine self. As awareness softly recedes, picture that luminescence within, expanding with tranquil warmth, dissolving the day's lingering echoes into boundless peace. Surrender fully to the quiet embrace, allowing each gentle breath to carry you deeper into repose, knowing that the light within you, your divine spark, is eternally safe, eternally cherished, and always, always guiding you home.